The gunshot that shattered the morning stillness of Veta, Colorado, sent Evelyn Thornton diving behind the water trough outside her father's general store, her heart hammering against her ribs as she pressed her cheek against the rough wood and tried to make sense of the chaos erupting around her. It was August 1878, and the small mining town nestled in the shadow of the Spanish Peaks had seen its share of trouble, but nothing quite like this. 3 men on horseback were tearing down Main Street, firing wildly into the air, their faces covered with red bandanas as they made for the bank at the end of the dusty thoroughfare. Evelyn was 22 years old, unmarried by choice rather than circumstance, and she had lived her entire life in this town where everyone knew everyone else's business. She watched through the gap between the trough and the storefront as Marshal Higgins stepped into the street, his hand hovering over his pistol, and she wanted to scream at him to take cover because those men were clearly dangerous and desperate. The tallest of the 3 riders pulled his horse to a sudden stop, the animal rearing up on its hind legs as the man wheeled around to face the marshal. Even from her hiding place, Evelyn could see the tension in the rider's shoulders, the way his hand gripped his revolver. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of firing, the tall rider raised his other hand in a gesture that seemed almost peaceful, and he called out something to his companions that made them stop their wild shooting. The marshal stood his ground, and for a moment, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. Then the tall rider holstered his weapon, said something else to the other 2 men, and all 3 of them wheeled their horses around and galloped out of town, leaving nothing but dust and confusion in their wake. Evelyn slowly rose from behind the trough, her legs shaking as she brushed dirt from her blue cotton dress. Her father, Ernest Thornton, came rushing out of the store, his face pale with worry as he gripped her shoulders and looked her over for any sign of injury. "Are you hurt? Did they harm you?" he demanded, his voice rough with fear. "I am fine, Papa. They did not even come close to me," she assured him, though her voice trembled slightly. "What do you suppose that was about? They seemed intent on robbing the bank, but then the tall one just stopped them." Her father shook his head, his graying beard bristling with agitation. "I do not know, but I intend to find out. You get inside and stay there until we know what is happening." But Evelyn was not the type to hide while others dealt with trouble. She had inherited her father's stubborn streak and her late mother's compassion, and she had been running the store's accounts since she was 16 when consumption had taken her mother. She followed her father down the street where a small crowd was gathering around Marshal Higgins, everyone talking at once and speculating about the identity of the would-be robbers. "That was Xander Graves and his gang," old Tom Hutchins said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "I would recognize that tall devil anywhere. He has been running with the Dalton crew for the past 3 years, robbing banks and trains all across Colorado and Kansas." The name meant nothing to Evelyn, but she could see recognition flash across several faces in the crowd. Marshal Higgins removed his hat and wiped his forehead with a handkerchief, looking more shaken than she had ever seen him. "If that was truly Graves, then we are fortunate to still be breathing," the marshal said quietly. "He is wanted in 4 territories, and there is a $2,000 bounty on his head. But I do not understand why he called off the robbery. He had us dead to rights." "Maybe he saw you standing there all brave and heroic-like, and decided you were too much man for him to handle," someone called out, prompting nervous laughter from the crowd. But Evelyn did not laugh. She kept thinking about that moment when the tall rider had raised his hand, the way he had stopped his companions from continuing their rampage. There had been something in his posture, something that did not fit with the image of a ruthless outlaw. She could not explain it, even to herself, but she felt certain that whatever had happened in those brief moments on Main Street, it had not been about cowardice or fear. The rest of the day passed in a blur of gossip and speculation. Everyone in Veta had an opinion about why Xander Graves had ridden into town and then left without taking anything. Some said he had been scouting the bank for a future robbery. Others claimed he had simply been passing through, and his companions had gotten overexcited. A few insisted that Marshal Higgins had somehow intimidated the outlaws with his steely resolve, though the marshal himself seemed skeptical of that theory. Evelyn spent the afternoon in the store, helping customers and trying to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering back to that moment in the street. She had caught only a glimpse of the tall rider's eyes above his bandana, but they had been a striking shade of gray, like storm clouds before rain. She chided herself for being foolish. The man was an outlaw, a criminal who had chosen a life of violence and theft. Whatever had made him call off the robbery, it certainly had nothing to do with decency or conscience. That evening, as she was closing up the store, she heard a commotion outside. Through the window, she could see a group of men on horseback riding into town, but these were not outlaws. They wore deputy badges and had the hard, weathered look of men who spent their lives in the saddle hunting criminals. She watched as they stopped at the marshal's office, and a few minutes later, her father came hurrying back from the saloon where he had been sharing a drink with some of the other merchants. "Those are federal marshals," he told her breathlessly. "They have been tracking Xander Graves for months, and they heard about what happened here today. They are planning to set up camp outside town and wait for him to come back." "Why would he come back?" Evelyn asked, locking the store's front door and following her father around to the back stairs that led up to their living quarters above the store. They seemed to think he was here for a reason, and that reason was not the bank. One of them said that Graves has family ties to this area, though nobody seems to know exactly what that means. Her father paused on the stairs and turned to look at her with concern. "I want you to be extra careful for the next few days, Evelyn. Stay close to the store and do not go wandering off by yourself. These federal men might catch Graves, but they might also stir up trouble in the process." Evelyn promised to be careful, though she privately thought her father was being overly protective. She had lived in Veta her entire life and knew every street and alley. She could take care of herself. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to the wind whistle through the gaps in the wooden walls, she found herself thinking about Xander Graves again. What family ties could an outlaw possibly have in a small town like Veta? And why had he risked everything to ride into town in broad daylight? The next morning dawned clear and hot, the kind of August day that made the mountains shimmer in the distance and turned the main street into a dusty furnace by noon. Evelyn opened the store as usual, sweeping the front steps and arranging the display of canned goods in the window. Trade was slow, as most people were still nervous about the previous day's excitement, and she spent much of the morning reading a novel she had ordered from Denver. A romantic story about an English lady and a Scottish Highlander that was probably scandalous by the standards of Veta's more conservative residents. Around midday, a stranger walked into the store. He was not anyone Evelyn recognized, which was unusual in itself, as she knew virtually everyone in town and the surrounding ranches. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and a beard that looked like it had been recently trimmed. He wore dusty trail clothes and a hat pulled low over his eyes, and he moved with a careful, deliberate grace that immediately put Evelyn on alert. There was something familiar about him, though she could not place what it was. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, setting down her book and standing up from the stool behind the counter. The stranger lifted his head slightly, and she found herself looking into those same gray eyes she had glimpsed the day before above a red bandana. Her breath caught in her throat, and she instinctively took a step backward, her hand reaching for the shotgun her father kept under the counter. "Please do not," Xander Graves said quietly, his voice surprisingly gentle for a wanted outlaw. "I am not here to cause trouble. I just need to buy some supplies and then I will be on my way." Evelyn's hand hovered over the shotgun, her mind racing. She should scream for help. She should grab the gun and hold him until the marshal arrived. But something in his eyes stopped her, that same quality she had sensed yesterday when he called off the robbery. He looked tired and sad, not dangerous. "You have a lot of nerve coming back here," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There are federal marshals camped just outside town and they are looking for you." "I know," he said. "But I needed to come into town, and this seemed like the safest time, while everyone is having lunch and not paying attention." He gestured to the shelves behind her. "I need coffee, beans, bacon, and some ammunition if you have it. I can pay in gold." "I should turn you in," Evelyn said, though she still had not reached for the shotgun. "There is a reward for you. $2,000. That is more money than my father and I make in 3 years running this store." Xander nodded slowly. "You should turn me in." "That would be the smart thing to do, but I am asking you not to, at least not until I have had a chance to explain why I am here." "Why should I listen to anything you have to say? You are an outlaw and a criminal." "Because yesterday, when I rode into town, I saw you behind that water trough," he said. "And I saw how frightened you were, and I could not go through with the robbery knowing that you and all those other people might get hurt because of my choices. So I called it off, even though it meant disappointing my partners and losing our chance at that bank money." Evelyn stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You called off the robbery because of me." "Not just because of you," Xander said quickly. "Because of everyone. Because I looked around at this town, and I realized that I was tired of being the man who makes people frightened. I am tired of running and hiding and living like an animal. I want something different, but I do not know how to get there from where I am now." There was such raw honesty in his voice that Evelyn found herself believing him, even though every sensible part of her brain was screaming that she was being foolish. She let her hand drop away from the shotgun and crossed her arms over her chest, studying him carefully. "What are you doing in Veta?" she asked. "The federal marshals said you have family ties here." Xander's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he was not going to answer. Then he sighed and pulled off his hat, running his fingers through his dark hair. "My mother is buried here. She died 15 years ago, when I was 10 years old. She is in the cemetery on the hill outside town. I have not been back since we buried her, but I wanted to visit her grave before I leave this territory for good." The simple honesty of the statement struck something deep in Evelyn's chest. She had lost her own mother 6 years ago, and she still visited the grave every Sunday with fresh wildflowers. She could not imagine going 15 years without paying respects to the woman who had given her life. "What was her name?" she asked softly. "Margaret Graves, though she went by Maggie. She married my father when she was 17, and she died of fever when we were living in a mining camp up near Kachara. We buried her here because this was the nearest town with a proper cemetery." Evelyn knew the cemetery well. It was a peaceful place, shaded by cottonwood trees and surrounded by a low stone wall. She tried to remember if she had ever seen a gravestone for Margaret Graves, but she could not recall one. "After your mother died, what happened to you?" she asked, surprised by her own curiosity. Xander's face darkened. "My father took me and my younger sister west, chasing one mining claim after another. He was not a good man, and he got worse after my mother died. When I was 15, I ran away and left my sister with him. I have regretted that every day since. I fell in with the wrong crowd, made bad choices, and ended up where I am now. Where is your sister? I do not know. I lost track of her years ago. For all I know, she could be anywhere. His voice was heavy with guilt and regret. Evelyn felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for this dangerous stranger. Whatever he had done, whatever crimes he had committed, he was clearly carrying a heavy burden of pain and remorse. She made a decision that she knew her father would consider reckless and foolish, but she made it anyway. "I will get your supplies," she said, "but I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me that you will visit your mother's grave and then leave this territory, just like you said, and promise me that you will not hurt anyone on your way out." Xander met her eyes, and she saw gratitude and surprise in his expression. "I promise. Both things. You have my word." She gathered the supplies he had requested, moving quickly but quietly, constantly glancing toward the door to make sure no one was coming. When she had everything packed in a burlap sack, she hesitated before handing it to him. "Why did you really call off that robbery yesterday?" she asked. "Tell me the truth." He looked at her for a long moment, and she felt something shift in the air between them, something she could not name but could definitely feel. "Because when I looked at you, I saw everything I have lost: innocence, hope, the possibility of a normal life. And I realized that I did not want to be the man who destroys those things for other people. I have destroyed enough already." She handed him the sack, and their fingers brushed briefly. Even through the rough fabric of his work gloves, she felt a jolt of connection that startled her. He must have felt it too, because he pulled back quickly and dug into his pocket, producing several gold coins. "This is too much," Evelyn said, looking at the money. "Keep it. Use it to buy yourself something nice. Consider it payment for your kindness and your discretion." He turned to leave, but Evelyn found herself calling after him. "Wait, what will you do? After you visit the cemetery, I mean, where will you go?" Xander paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the bright sunlight outside. "I do not know yet. Maybe Mexico, maybe California. Somewhere the law has not caught up with me yet." He glanced back at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart ache. "Thank you, miss. You are kinder than I deserve." Then he was gone, slipping out into the street and disappearing around the corner before anyone could see him. Evelyn stood behind the counter, her heart pounding, wondering what on earth she had just done. She had helped a wanted criminal escape justice. She had taken his money and given him supplies. If anyone found out, she could be arrested as an accomplice. But somehow, none of that seemed to matter as much as the memory of his eyes and the raw pain in his voice when he talked about his mother and his lost sister. She hid the gold coins in the cash box under a stack of receipts and tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering. She kept imagining Xander Graves riding up to the cemetery, dismounting from his horse, and standing before his mother's grave after all these years. What would he say to her? Would he apologize for the life he had led? Would he tell her about the regrets that clearly haunted him? The afternoon wore on, hot and slow. A few customers came and went, but Evelyn barely registered them. Her father returned from a meeting with the town council, full of news about the federal marshals and their plans to patrol the area for the next week. He did not notice her distraction, which was fortunate, because she was not sure she could have explained it even if he had asked. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Evelyn made a decision. She told her father she was going to visit her mother's grave before dinner, something she often did, so he did not question it. She grabbed a shawl and walked out of town toward the cemetery, her feet carrying her along the familiar path, almost without conscious thought. The cemetery was empty when she arrived, peaceful and quiet in the golden evening light. She walked among the gravestones, pretending to be heading toward her mother's plot, but her eyes were searching for something else. She finally found it in the older section, near the back wall where the earliest residents of Veta were buried. The stone was small and simple, weathered by 15 years of sun and snow and wind. Margaret Graves, it read, born 1835, died 1863, beloved wife and mother. Someone had been there recently. The grass around the grave had been cleared of weeds, and there were fresh wildflowers lying on the stone, the kind that grew in the meadows above town. Evelyn knelt beside the grave, touching the flowers gently. They were still fresh, probably picked within the last hour. She imagined Xander kneeling in this same spot, his head bowed, talking to the mother he had lost so long ago. "He came to see you," she whispered to the silent stone. "Your son came back after all these years. I hope you know that. I hope you know he remembers you." She sat there for a while, listening to the wind in the cottonwood trees and the distant sound of the town settling in for evening. When she finally rose to leave, she placed her own hand on Margaret Graves' headstone, a gesture of connection to a woman she had never known but somehow felt close to in that moment. The next 3 days passed in a strange state of tension. The federal marshals continued their patrols, but there was no sign of Xander Graves or his companions. Evelyn went about her daily routine, helping in the store, keeping the accounts, and avoiding her father's occasional questions about why she seemed so distracted. She found herself thinking about Xander constantly, wondering if he had made it safely out of the territory, wondering what kind of life he might build for himself if he could escape his past. On the 4th day, everything changed. Evelyn was in the back room of the store, inventorying a shipment of fabric that had just arrived from Denver, when she heard shouting in the street. She rushed to the front window and saw a crowd gathering near the marshal's office. Her father was already heading that direction, and she followed him, her heart sinking with a premonition of bad news. Marshal Higgins was standing on the steps of his office, holding up his hands for quiet. When the crowd settled, he spoke in a voice that carried across the street. "The federal marshals have captured 2 members of Xander Graves' gang. They are being held in the jail right now. The marshals are questioning them about Graves' whereabouts, and they expect to have him in custody within the week." A cheer went up from some members of the crowd, but Evelyn felt her stomach twist with anxiety. She pushed closer, trying to hear more details. One of the federal marshals, a hard-faced man with a thick mustache, was talking to a group of townsmen near the jail door. "We caught them trying to rob a stagecoach 20 miles south of here," the marshal was saying. "They put up a fight, but we had the advantage. They claim Graves split off from them 3 days ago, and they have not seen him since. They think he might have headed down into New Mexico territory." Evelyn felt a small measure of relief. If Xander had left 3 days ago, right after visiting the cemetery, then he was probably long gone by now. The marshals would waste their time searching for him while he made his escape. She started to turn away, but then she heard the marshal say something that froze her in her tracks. "The interesting thing is, one of them claims that Graves has been talking about going straight, said he was tired of the outlaw life and wanted to find honest work. Can you imagine that? As if a man like Xander Graves could ever be anything but what he is." The crowd laughed at the idea, and several men made disparaging comments about outlaws who thought they could change their ways. But Evelyn did not laugh. She remembered the look in Xander's eyes when he had stood in her store, the pain and regret in his voice. She believed him when he said he wanted something different. and she believed that somewhere inside the outlaw was a man who deserved a chance at redemption. Over the next week, life in La Veta gradually returned to normal. The federal marshals packed up and left, taking their 2 prisoners with them. There were no more sightings of Xander Graves, and people began to speculate that he had left Colorado for good. The reward money remained unclaimed, and the story of the aborted bank robbery became just another tale to tell over drinks at the saloon. But Evelyn could not forget. She found herself visiting Margaret Graves' headstone every few days, always bringing fresh flowers, always thinking about the son who had loved his mother enough to risk capture just to pay his respects. She wondered if Xander had made it to safety, if he was building that different life he had talked about, if he ever thought about the young woman in the general store who had helped him when she should have turned him in. Autumn arrived early that year, bringing cold winds down from the mountains and turning the aspen trees gold. Evelyn threw herself into her work, expanding the store's inventory and negotiating better prices with their suppliers in Denver. Her father was pleased with her initiative, though he occasionally expressed concern that she was working too hard and not taking time to socialize with other young people in town. He worried that she was becoming too much of a spinster, though she insisted she was perfectly content with her life. The truth was more complicated. Evelyn had received several marriage proposals over the years from respectable young men in La Veta and the surrounding ranches, but she had turned them all down. None of them had stirred anything in her heart beyond friendship and mild affection. She had always believed that marriage should be based on something deeper, something more passionate and real. Her parents had loved each other with a fierce devotion that had made their small home feel full of warmth and joy, and she wanted nothing less for herself. But after meeting Xander Graves, she found herself comparing every man she met to a dangerous outlaw with sad gray eyes, and they all came up wanting. October brought the first snow, just a light dusting that melted by noon but served as a reminder that winter was coming. The town began preparing for the cold months ahead, and the store did brisk business in wool blankets, warm clothing, and supplies for people who lived in the more remote areas and might be snowed in for weeks at a time. It was late on a Saturday afternoon, with the sun already setting behind the mountains and most people heading home for supper, when Evelyn saw him again. She was locking up the store, her father having already gone upstairs to start cooking their evening meal when a man on horseback rode slowly down Main Street. At first, she did not recognize him. He was clean-shaven now, his hair cut short, and he wore the plain work clothes of a ranch hand rather than the dusty trail gear of an outlaw. But when he dismounted and tied his horse to the rail in front of the store, she knew immediately who he was. Xander Graves looked different, but his eyes were the same. He approached slowly, his hands visible and empty, as if to show he meant no threat. Evelyn stood frozen on the store's front step, her keys clutched in her hand, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I know you must be surprised to see me," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I should not have come back, but I had to." "The marshals are gone," Evelyn said, finding her voice. "They left weeks ago. Everyone thinks you are in Mexico or California by now." "I know. I have been keeping track of things from a distance." He took a step closer, and she could see that he looked healthier than he had before, less hunted and desperate. "I went south after I visited my mother's grave, like I said I would. I got as far as Santa Fe before I realized I could not keep running." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I have been running my whole life, and I am tired of it. I am tired of looking over my shoulder and sleeping with one eye open. I am tired of being afraid. And I am tired of being the kind of man that people are right to fear." He pulled off his hat and held it in both hands, his expression earnest and vulnerable. "You showed me kindness when you had no reason to. You gave me supplies and kept my secret, even though it could have gotten you in trouble. And when you did that, something changed inside me. I realized that if one person could see past what I have done and treat me like I was still worth something, then maybe I really am. Maybe I can still be more than just an outlaw and a killer." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes, though she could not have said exactly why. "What are you saying? Why did you come back here?" "Because I want to try to make things right. I know I can never undo the things I have done, but I can try to be better going forward. And I wanted to start here in the place where my mother is buried, in the town where someone believed I could be more than my worst choices." He met her eyes, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "I want to work, honest work. I want to earn an honest living and prove that I can be trusted. I know it will take time, and I know people will be suspicious, but I have to try." "You will be arrested the moment someone recognizes you," Evelyn said. "There is still a bounty on your head. The marshals may be gone, but there are plenty of people who would turn you in for that reward money." "I know. That is why I am going to turn myself in." Evelyn stared at him in shock. "You are going to what?" "I am going to Marshal Higgins and tell him who I am. I am going to explain that I am done with the outlaw life and that I want to face justice for what I have done. Maybe he will arrest me and send me to prison. Maybe the judge will decide I deserve to hang. But at least I will have tried to do the right thing. At least I will have stopped running." "That is insane," Evelyn said, her voice rising with emotion. "They will lock you up and throw away the key, or worse. You cannot just walk into the marshal's office and expect them to give you a second chance." "I am not expecting anything," Xander said quietly, "but I have to try. I have spent the last 2 months thinking about this, and it is the only way forward that makes any sense. I cannot build a new life on top of lies and running. I have to face what I have done and accept the consequences." Evelyn felt a strange mix of admiration and terror. She barely knew this man, and yet his courage and determination moved her deeply. She thought about all the people she knew who took the easy path, who avoided responsibility and made excuses for their failures. And here was someone willing to risk everything, including his life, to try to become a better person. "Wait," she said, her mind racing. "Do not go to the marshal tonight. Give me a day. Let me talk to some people first. Maybe there is another way." Xander looked surprised. "Why would you help me?" "You do not owe me anything. If anything, I owe you for keeping my secret." "I am helping you because I believe you," Evelyn said simply. "I believe that you want to change, and I believe you deserve a chance to prove yourself. But marching into the marshal's office and confessing everything is not the way to do it. That is just another form of running in its own way. You need to show people through your actions that you have changed, not just tell them." "How do I do that?" Evelyn thought for a moment, an idea beginning to form in her mind. "There is a ranch about 10 miles west of town, owned by a man named Jacob Hartford. He is a friend of my father, and he is a fair man. His foreman quit last month, and he has been struggling to find good help. If I can convince him to give you a job, would you take it, working as a ranch hand?" Xander looked uncertain. "I do not know much about ranching. I grew up in mining camps. You can learn. The point is to prove that you can do honest work and be trusted. Jacob Hartford is respected in this community. If he vouches for you, it will mean something. And if you work hard and keep your head down, people will start to see you differently." "But what about my past? What about the bounty?" "We will deal with that later, once you have established yourself as a changed man. Maybe we can find a lawyer who can help negotiate a pardon or reduced sentence. But first, you need to show everyone that you are serious about this." She stepped closer to him, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "Can you do that? Can you be patient and work hard and trust that things will work out?" Xander looked at her for a long moment, and she saw hope kindle in his expression like a flame being coaxed to life. "If you think it will work, then yes. I will do whatever you think is best. I trust you." Those last 3 words hit her with unexpected force. This dangerous man, this outlaw who had spent years living by his wits and his gun, was putting his faith in her. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "Good," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Stay out of town tonight. There is an old line shack about 5 miles north near the creek. Do you know it? I can find it. Wait there. I will talk to Jacob Hartford tomorrow after church and see if I can convince him to meet with you. If he agrees, I will come to the shack tomorrow afternoon and take you to his ranch." "Thank you," Xander said, his voice rough with emotion. "I do not know why you are doing this, but thank you." Evelyn smiled, surprising herself. "I am doing this because my mother always told me that everyone deserves a second chance, and because when I look at you, I do not see an outlaw. I see a man who is trying very hard to find his way home." Xander's expression softened, and for a moment she thought he might reach for her hand, but instead he simply nodded, put his hat back on, and mounted his horse. "I will be waiting at the line shack," he said, "and Miss Thornton. I will not let you down. I promise you that." He rode off into the gathering darkness, and Evelyn watched him go, her heart full of emotions she could not name. She had just committed herself to helping a wanted criminal escape justice and build a new life. It was reckless and possibly dangerous, and if anyone found out what she was doing, she could face serious consequences. But somehow, none of that mattered as much as the conviction in her heart that she was doing the right thing. She went upstairs to find her father already serving supper, a simple meal of stew and bread. He did not ask why she had taken so long locking up, and she did not volunteer any information. Instead, she ate her meal and listened to him talk about the town council meeting and the plans for the upcoming winter. And she tried to figure out exactly how she was going to convince Jacob Hartford to hire a man he had never met. The next morning, Evelyn dressed carefully for church in her best blue dress and matching bonnet. She sat through Reverend Thompson's sermon on forgiveness and redemption, finding the timing almost painfully appropriate. When the service ended, she made her way through the crowd of worshipers until she spotted Jacob Hartford standing with his wife near the church steps. He was a big man in his 50s, with a weathered face and kind eyes, and his wife Sarah was a plump, cheerful woman who ran the ranch household with quiet efficiency. "Good morning, Mr. Hartford, Mrs. Hartford," Evelyn said, approaching them with what she hoped was a natural smile. "I wonder if I might have a word with you about a business matter." Jacob Hartford looked surprised but nodded agreeably. "Of course, Miss Thornton. What can I do for you?" Evelyn glanced around, making sure no one else was close enough to overhear. "I understand you are looking for ranch hands. I may know someone who is interested in the position." "That would be welcome news indeed," Hartford said. "I have been short-handed since my foreman quit, and with winter coming on, I need all the help I can get. Who is this person?" This was the tricky part. Evelyn had rehearsed several different versions of this conversation in her mind, but none of them felt quite right. In the end, she decided that honesty, or at least a version of it, was the best approach. "His name is Xander Graves. He is new to the area and looking for work. He does not have much ranching experience, but he is willing to learn and he is a hard worker." Jacob Hartford frowned slightly. "Graves? I do not recognize that name. Where is he from?" "He has been traveling for work," Evelyn said carefully. "His mother is buried here in Veta, and he wanted to settle in the area to be close to her grave." I met him recently, and I think he deserves a chance to prove himself." Sarah Hartford spoke up, her voice warm with sympathy. "How lovely that he wants to honor his mother's memory." "What did you say her name was?" "Margaret Graves. She died about 15 years ago." Jacob Hartford's expression shifted to one of recognition. "Maggie Graves, I remember her. She was married to a miner named William Graves. They had a couple of children, if I recall correctly." "Whatever happened to them?" "The husband took the children west after Maggie died," Evelyn said, sticking as close to the truth as she could. "Xander is one of those children. He is 25 years old now, and he wants to make a fresh start here." "Well, any son of Maggie Graves is worth meeting," Hartford said decisively. "She was a good woman, kind and hardworking. If her boy has any of her qualities, he will do just fine. When can he come out to the ranch?" Evelyn felt a rush of relief so strong it made her dizzy. "He could come this afternoon if that suits you." "That would be perfect. We usually have Sunday dinner around 2 o'clock. Tell him to come by around 3, and I will sit down with him and discuss the position." Hartford paused, giving her a shrewd look. "You seem mighty invested in this young man getting a job, Miss Thornton. Is there something I should know about him?" Evelyn felt her cheeks flush, but she met Hartford's gaze steadily. "I believe he is a good person who deserves a chance, Mr. Hartford. That is all. He has made some mistakes in his past, as we all have, but he is trying to do better. I think you will see that when you meet him." Hartford nodded slowly. "Fair enough. I will give him a chance, but I expect honest work for honest pay. If he cannot handle that, he will be gone within a week." "I do not think that will be a problem," Evelyn said, smiling with genuine warmth. "Thank you, Mr. Hartford. You are doing a good thing." As soon as she could politely excuse herself from the church crowd, Evelyn hurried home, changed into her riding clothes, and saddled her mare Daisy. Her father was puzzled by her sudden need to go riding on a Sunday afternoon, but she explained that she needed to clear her head and think about some business decisions for the store. He seemed to accept this explanation, though he reminded her to be back before dark. The ride to the line shack took just over an hour, following the creek north through stands of pine and aspen. The autumn colors were at their peak, and under different circumstances, Evelyn would have enjoyed the beauty of the landscape. But today, she was too focused on her mission to appreciate the scenery. She had to make sure Xander understood how important it was that he make a good impression on Jacob Hartford. This was his one chance to start building a new life, and she would not let him waste it. She found the line shack exactly where she remembered it, a small, sturdy building that was used by ranch hands during the spring and fall roundups. Smoke was coming from the chimney, and Xander's horse was tied up outside. When she dismounted and knocked on the door, he opened it immediately, his face lighting up with relief when he saw her. "I was starting to worry that something had gone wrong," he said, stepping back to let her inside. The shack was sparse but clean, with a small stove, a rough table, and a couple of bunks along the wall. Xander had clearly been making himself at home, and she noticed he had cleaned the place up and laid in some firewood. "Everything went well," Evelyn said, warming her hands by the stove. "Jacob Hartford has agreed to meet with you this afternoon. He remembers your mother, and that helped considerably." Xander closed his eyes briefly, and she saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. "He remembers her. He said she was a good woman, kind and hardworking." "Those are his words, not mine. He is willing to give you a job based on his respect for her memory, but you will need to prove yourself through your work." "I will," Xander said fervently. "I will work harder than anyone he has ever hired. I will show him that his faith is not misplaced." Evelyn studied him carefully, noting the determination in his face. "You need to understand something, Xander. If Hartford finds out who you really are, that you are wanted by the law, it will not just be you who suffers. It will be me as well, because I am the one who recommended you. And it will be Hartford because he will feel foolish for trusting my judgment. So you need to be absolutely certain that you are ready for this." "I am ready," Xander said without hesitation. "I know what is at stake and I will not let you down, or Hartford, or myself." She believed him. Against all logic and reason, she believed that this outlaw was truly committed to changing his life. "Good. Then we should get going. The ranch is about 2 hours from here and you need to be there by 3 o'clock. They rode together through the autumn afternoon, taking back roads and trails to avoid being seen by anyone who might recognize Xander. As they traveled, Evelyn found herself asking him questions about his past, driven by a curiosity she could not suppress. He answered honestly, telling her about growing up in mining camps, about his father's drinking and violence, about the desperate poverty that had driven him to make bad choices. "After I ran away from my father, I fell in with a group of older boys who were stealing to survive," he explained as they guided their horses along a narrow trail. "At first, it was just small things, food from market stalls, blankets from clotheslines, but then we graduated to bigger crimes. Robbing travelers, breaking into stores. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was running with a gang of outlaws and there was a price on my head." "Did you ever kill anyone?" Evelyn asked, not sure she wanted to know the answer. Xander was quiet for a long moment. "I have shot at men, yes, in robberies and when running from the law, but I never aimed to kill, and as far as I know, I never did. That was one line I refused to cross, even when my partners wanted me to. It is part of the reason I eventually split from them. They were becoming more violent, more willing to hurt innocent people, and I could not stomach it anymore." "Is that why you called off the robbery in Veta?" "That was part of it, but the bigger reason was what I told you before. I looked around and saw what I was doing, saw the fear in people's faces, and I just could not anymore. Something broke inside me, or maybe something finally healed. I do not know, but I knew I had to stop." They arrived at Hartford's ranch a little before 3 o'clock. It was a prosperous spread, with several well-maintained buildings, extensive corrals, and hundreds of cattle grazing on the surrounding grassland. Jacob Hartford came out to meet them as they rode up, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw Evelyn. "Miss Thornton, good to see you again," he said, then turned his attention to Xander. "And you must be Mr. Graves. Welcome. Why do not you two come inside and we will talk?" They followed Hartford into the ranch house, a comfortable home with solid furniture and walls decorated with family photographs and landscape paintings. Sarah Hartford brought out coffee and fresh apple pie, fussing over them like they were honored guests rather than potential employees. Evelyn watched as Xander sat down at the table, his posture respectful but not servile, his hand steady as he accepted a cup of coffee. "So, Mr. Graves," Hartford began, settling into his chair with a slight grunt. "Miss Thornton tells me you are looking for ranch work and that you are willing to learn. Tell me a bit about yourself and what brings you to Veta." Xander set down his coffee cup and met Hartford's eyes directly. "I am the son of William and Margaret Graves. My mother died here 15 years ago, and I have been working various jobs around the West since I was a teenager. Recently, I decided I wanted to settle down and make something of myself. I came back to Veta because this is where my mother is buried, and I wanted to be close to her memory. As for ranch work, you are right that I do not have much experience, but I am strong, I learn quickly, and I am not afraid of hard work." Hartford nodded thoughtfully. "Your mother was a fine woman. I am sorry for your loss. What kind of work have you been doing?" This was dangerous territory, and Evelyn held her breath, but Xander navigated it carefully. Various things. I have worked in mines, on freight wagons, and doing odd jobs around different towns. Nothing I am particularly proud of, to be honest, but I am done with that kind of drifting. I want to put down roots and build a real life. That is a respectable ambition, Hartford said. I can offer you work as a ranch hand. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board in the bunkhouse. The work is hard, especially in winter. You will be up before dawn, working until dark, doing everything from mending fences to breaking horses to herding cattle. Can you handle that? Yes, sir, I can. Good. When can you start? Right now, if you want me to. Hartford laughed, a deep, genuine sound. I like your enthusiasm. How about you start tomorrow morning? That will give you time to get your things settled. The bunkhouse is out back. My foreman died last spring, so you will be reporting directly to me for now. I run a tight ship, Mr. Graves. I expect honesty, hard work, and respect for everyone on this ranch. Can you give me those things? You have my word, Xander said, and Evelyn could hear the sincerity in his voice. Then we have a deal. Hartford stood and extended his hand, and Xander shook it firmly. Welcome to the Hartford Ranch. I have a feeling you are going to do just fine here. As they rode back toward town together in the fading afternoon light, Evelyn felt a strange mix of emotions. She was relieved that Xander had gotten the job, proud of how he had handled himself in the interview, and increasingly aware of how much time she was spending thinking about this man she barely knew. When they were about a mile from town, she pulled Daisy to a stop and turned to face him. This is where we should part ways, she said. You can circle around and approach the ranch from the west without going through town. I will ride straight back. Xander nodded, but he made no move to leave. Instead, he studied her face in the golden light of the setting sun, his expression serious and thoughtful. Why are you doing all this for me, Evelyn? And please tell me the truth. It was the first time he had used her given name, and hearing it on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cooling air. She thought about lying, about giving him some noble reason about Christian charity or respect for his mother. But he had asked for the truth, and she found she wanted to give it to him. Because when you walked into my store that first time, you looked like every other outlaw and drifter I have ever seen. Dangerous and desperate and beyond saving. But then you spoke, and I heard something in your voice that made me think you were different. And when you came back and told me you wanted to change, I believed you. I do not know why, but I did, and I still do. She paused, gathering her courage. And because I think there is more to you than the mistakes you have made. I think there is a good man inside, someone who deserves a chance to prove what he can be. Xander's eyes shone with emotion, and for a moment she thought he might say something profound. Instead, he simply reached out and gently touched her hand where it rested on her saddle horn. It was a brief contact, barely a second, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. Thank you, he said quietly. I will not forget this, any of it. And I will prove that your faith in me is justified. I promise you that. Then he touched the brim of his hat in a respectful gesture, turned his horse, and rode off toward the Hartford ranch. Evelyn watched him go until he disappeared over a rise, then turned Daisy toward home, her mind spinning with thoughts and feelings she was not ready to examine too closely. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn found herself thinking about Xander constantly. She had no excuse to visit the Hartford ranch, and she could not ask about him without arousing suspicion, so she had to content herself with the occasional bits of news that filtered into town. Her father mentioned that Jacob Hartford had hired a new hand who was working out well. One of their customers, a ranch wife, commented that the Hartford place was looking better than it had in months, with all the fences mended and the outbuildings repaired. Each piece of news made Evelyn's heart lift with pride and relief. She continued her Sunday visits to the cemetery, always stopping at Margaret Graves' headstone to leave fresh flowers. She found herself talking to the dead woman, telling her about her son and how hard he was working to change his life. It made her feel less alone in her secret knowledge, as if she had an ally in this woman who had loved Xander when he was just a boy. October gave way to November, and the first serious snow fell, blanketing the valley in white and turning the mountains into a picture postcard. The store was busy with people preparing for winter, and Evelyn threw herself into her work, trying not to think too much about the man who had disrupted her carefully ordered life. Then, one crisp Saturday morning, Xander walked into the store. Evelyn looked up from the inventory she was taking and felt her heart leap at the sight of him. He looked different than he had before, healthier and more confident. His face was tanned from working outdoors, and his clothes, while worn, were clean and well-maintained. But it was his eyes that struck her most. They were still the same gray, but the haunted look was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. "Good morning, Miss Thornton," he said formally, removing his hat as he approached the counter. "I hope I am not intruding." "Of course not," Evelyn said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fact that her pulse was racing. "How can I help you today? I need some winter supplies. Mr. Hartford gave me a list." He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. "And I wanted to thank you properly for everything you have done for me." Evelyn glanced at the list, then looked around the store to make sure they were alone. Her father was in the back room and there were no other customers at the moment. "How are you finding the work?" she asked quietly. "It is hard," Xander admitted. "Harder than anything I have ever done. But it is good hard if that makes sense. I am learning things, building things, being part of something that matters. And Mr. Hartford is a fair man. He expects a lot, but he treats everyone with respect." "Has anyone recognized you?" "No. I keep to myself mostly, and I let my beard grow back, which changes my appearance some. The other ranch hands think I am just a drifter who got lucky with a steady job. Nobody suspects anything." Evelyn began gathering the items on Hartford's list, and Xander followed her around the store, carrying the supplies as she added them to the pile. They moved together with an easy rhythm, not quite touching but always aware of each other's presence. When she reached for a sack of flour on a high shelf, he stepped close behind her and lifted it down easily, his arms brushing against hers in the process. The brief contact made her breath catch. "I have been wanting to ask you something," Xander said as she tallied up the total cost of the supplies. "Would you allow me to walk you home after church tomorrow? I know it is forward of me, and I will understand if you say no, but I would like the chance to talk with you properly." Evelyn felt her face flush with pleasure and nervousness. "What will people think if they see us together? They will think I am a ranch hand who is interested in the prettiest girl in town, which happens to be true." His gray eyes held hers, and she saw warmth and sincerity in them. "Then yes," she said, making a decision that both terrified and thrilled her. "You may walk me home after church." The next morning, Evelyn dressed with extra care, choosing her green dress that her mother had always said brought out the color of her eyes. She sat through the church service in a state of nervous anticipation, barely hearing Reverend Thompson's sermon on gratitude. When the service ended, she saw Xander standing near the steps, looking clean and respectable in what must have been borrowed Sunday clothes. Several people gave him curious glances, but no one seemed to recognize him as the outlaw who had nearly robbed the bank months earlier. Jacob Hartford spotted Evelyn and waved her over, Xander at his side. "Miss Thornton, I wanted to thank you again for recommending Mr. Graves here." He has been an absolute godsend. Best hand I have had in years. I am glad it is working out, Evelyn said, trying not to smile too broadly. In fact, I was just telling him he should take some time for himself today, since he has been working 7 days a week since he started. A young man needs to socialize, not just work all the time. Hartford gave Xander a knowing look, especially when there are lovely young ladies in town. Evelyn felt her cheeks burn, but she managed to keep her composure. Actually, Mr. Hartford, I was just about to invite Mr. Graves to join my father and me for Sunday dinner. If you can spare him, that is. Of course, Hartford said heartily. You young people enjoy yourselves. As they walked away from the church together, Xander leaned close and murmured, "That was very smooth, Miss Thornton. I did not know you were such a skilled liar." "I am not lying," Evelyn said primly. "You are coming to dinner. I just decided it this very moment." He laughed, a sound of genuine joy that made her heart soar. It was the first time she had heard him laugh, and she realized how much younger he looked when he was happy. Dinner with her father was less awkward than Evelyn had feared. Ernest Thornton was naturally hospitable, and he seemed pleased that his daughter had finally shown interest in a young man. He asked Xander polite questions about his work at the ranch and his plans for the future, and Xander answered honestly without revealing anything incriminating. By the time they finished the meal, her father was clearly warming to the young man, and he invited Xander to visit again any time he was in town. After dinner, Xander offered to help Evelyn with the dishes while her father retired to his chair for his usual Sunday afternoon nap. They worked together in companionable silence for a while, and then Xander said quietly, "Your father is a good man. You are lucky to have him." "I know," Evelyn said, handing him a wet plate to dry. "What happened to your father?" "You said he was not a good man, but you never told me the rest of the story." Xander's expression darkened. "After I ran away, I heard that he drank himself to death within a year. My sister went to live with a family in Denver who needed household help. I tried to find her a few years ago, but the trail had gone cold. I do not even know if she is still alive." "What was her name?" "Anna. She would be 20 years old now if she is still alive. She had our mother's dark hair and her gentle nature. I should never have left her with him. That is one of the things I regret most in my life." Evelyn dried her hands on her apron and turned to face him fully. "You were just a child yourself, Xander. You cannot blame yourself for everything that went wrong." "Maybe not, but I can try to do better going forward, which is what I am doing." He set down the dish towel and took a step closer to her, his expression serious. "Evelyn, I need you to know something. I am not just trying to go straight for abstract reasons. I am doing it because I want to be the kind of man who deserves a woman like you. I know I have no right to court you, given my past, but I am asking for that right. I am asking for the chance to prove that I can be worthy of you." Evelyn's heart was beating so hard she could barely breathe. She had been courted before by respectable men, but none of them had ever made her feel the way she felt right now, standing in her kitchen with a reformed outlaw who was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "You do not have to prove anything to me," she said softly. "I already see who you are, Xander. I saw it from the beginning, even when you did not see it yourself. Yes, you have made mistakes. Yes, you have a past, but so does everyone. What matters is what you do from here forward, and I believe you are going to do great things." Xander reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to step back if she wanted to, and gently cupped her face in his work-roughened hand. His thumb brushed across her cheek in a caress that made her shiver with pleasure. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering, Evelyn rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was her first real kiss, and it was everything she had dreamed a kiss could be. sweet and tender and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Xander rested his forehead against hers and smiled. "I am going to marry you someday, Evelyn Thornton," he said with quiet certainty. "I am going to work hard and save money and become the kind of man your father will be proud to call his son-in-law. And then I am going to ask you to be my wife, and I hope very much that you will say yes." "I am fairly certain I will," Evelyn said, smiling through happy tears. "But we should probably take things slowly. People will talk if we rush into anything." "I do not care what people say." "I do not either, actually, but we need to be smart about this. You are still wanted by the law, and until we can figure out how to resolve that situation, we need to be careful." Xander sobered at the reminder. "You are right. I have been so focused on working and proving myself that I have not thought about how to handle the legal problems. Maybe I should just turn myself in and face whatever consequences come." "No," Evelyn said firmly. "Not yet. Give yourself more time to establish yourself here. Let people get to know you as Xander Graves, the hard-working ranch hand, not as Xander Graves, the outlaw. Then, when the time comes to reveal the truth, you will have allies and people who will speak on your behalf." It was a risky plan, and they both knew it. But it was the only one that made sense. For the next several months, they continued in this pattern. Xander worked hard at the ranch, building a reputation as a reliable and skilled employee. Evelyn ran the store and slowly let it become known that she was being courted by Jacob Hartford's new ranch hand. Her father approved of the relationship, as did most of the townspeople, who thought it was high time Evelyn settled down with a good man. Winter deepened, bringing heavy snows and bitter cold. Xander spent most of his time at the ranch, but he came to town every Sunday without fail, attending church and spending the afternoon with Evelyn and her father. They went on walks together when the weather allowed, and they sat by the fire talking for hours when it did not. Evelyn learned more about his childhood, about the few happy memories he had of his mother before she died, about his dreams for the future. And she shared her own stories, her own hopes and fears and aspirations. They fell in love slowly and completely, like snow accumulating over a long winter. There was no single moment when Evelyn realized she loved him, just a gradual deepening of feeling until she could not imagine her life without him in it. And from the way Xander looked at her, with reverence and devotion and wonder, she knew he felt the same way. Christmas came, and Evelyn gave Xander a new coat she had bought with her store earnings, something warm and practical for the cold months ahead. He gave her a locket he had saved up for, with his mother's name engraved inside next to space for Evelyn's own portrait. It was the most thoughtful gift she had ever received, and she wore it every day, close to her heart. The new year of 1879 arrived with fresh snow and new possibilities. Xander had been working for Jacob Hartford for nearly 4 months, and his transformation from outlaw to honest cowboy was complete. He had learned to rope and brand cattle, to break horses, to repair harnesses and mend fences. He had earned the respect of the other ranch hands and the trust of his employer. And he had won the heart of the woman he loved. But the past, as Evelyn knew, had a way of catching up with people, no matter how far they ran or how much they changed. In late January, 2 federal marshals rode into Veta, asking questions about Xander Graves and his gang. They had tracked some of the gang members to the area, and they were following up on old leads. Marshal Higgins remembered the attempted bank robbery from the previous summer, and he mentioned that the leader of that gang had been Xander Graves. One of the federal marshals, a tall man with cold blue eyes, asked if anyone had seen a man fitting Graves' description recently. Most people shook their heads, but then Tom Hutchins, the old gossip, spoke up. Well, there is Jacob Hartford's new hand. Name is Graves, come to think of it. Been working out at the ranch since October. But he is just a cowboy, far as I know, cannot be the same man. The marshals exchanged glances, and Evelyn, who was standing near enough to hear this conversation, felt her blood turn to ice. She watched as the marshals thanked Tom Hutchins and then rode out of town in the direction of the Hartford ranch. She wanted to scream at them to stop, to leave Xander alone, but she knew that would only make things worse. Instead, she grabbed her coat and ran to the stable, saddling Daisy with shaking hands. She had to warn Xander. She had to get to him before the marshals did. But even as she rode out of town, pushing Daisy as fast as she dared on the icy road, she knew she might be too late. The marshals had a head start, and they were riding hard. When she reached the Hartford ranch, she saw the 2 federal horses tied up outside the main house. Her heart sank, but she dismounted and rushed inside, following the sound of raised voices to Jacob Hartford's office. The scene that greeted her was tense. Xander was standing in the middle of the room, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture, while the 2 marshals had their guns drawn. Jacob Hartford was between them, his face red with anger. "Now you wait just a minute here," Hartford was saying. "I do not care what this man did in his past. He has been working for me for 4 months, and he has been nothing but honest and hard-working. You cannot just barge in here and arrest him without proof." "We have all the proof we need," the tall marshal said coldly. "This is Xander Graves, wanted in 4 territories for robbery and horse theft. There is a $2,000 bounty on his head, and we are taking him in." "Xander." Hartford turned to his employee, confusion and hurt in his eyes. "Is this true? Are you an outlaw?" Xander met his employer's gaze steadily. "I was, sir. Everything they say is true, but I am not that man anymore. I came here to start over, to make an honest life. And I have been honest with you about my work, even if I was not honest about my past. You lied to me. You put my family and my ranch in danger." "No, sir, I did not. I made sure no one knew where I was or who I had been. I never intended for my past to follow me here. I just wanted to work and earn an honest living. That is all I have been doing for the past 4 months. The tall marshal made a disgusted sound. "Do not listen to him, Hartford. Men like Graves do not change. They just get better at lying. Now step aside so we can take him into custody." "Wait." Evelyn pushed into the room, her voice ringing with authority she did not know she possessed. "You cannot arrest him without giving him a chance to prove he has changed." The marshals turned to stare at her, and the tall one's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "I am Evelyn Thornton. My father owns the general store in town, and I am the one who recommended Xander Graves for this job because I knew him and I believed he deserved a second chance." "You knew he was an outlaw?" the marshal demanded. "I knew he had made mistakes in his past, yes. But I also knew he was trying to change, and he has changed. Ask anyone in Veta. Ask Mr. Hartford. Xander has been working hard and living honestly for months now. He has not broken any laws or caused any trouble. Do you not see that proves he is not the same man he was before?" The second marshal, who had been silent until now, spoke up in a thoughtful voice. "She has a point, Jenkins. The man has been living under his own name in a small town for months. If he was still a dangerous criminal, he would be hiding, not working openly where anyone could recognize him." "He was hiding," Jenkins snapped. "He was hiding by pretending to be an honest man." "Or maybe he was actually being an honest man," Evelyn shot back. "Maybe he realized that he could be more than his mistakes. Is that really so hard to believe?" Jenkins glared at her. "You are defending a criminal, miss. That could make you an accomplice." "Then arrest me too," Evelyn said, lifting her chin defiantly. "But before you do, let me ask you something. What is the purpose of the law? Is it just to punish people for their past mistakes? Or is it to make society safer and better? Because if it is the latter, then arresting a man who has reformed and is living honestly makes no sense. You would be taking a productive member of society and turning him back into a criminal just to collect a bounty." The room fell silent. Even Jenkins seemed momentarily stumped by her logic. Then Jacob Hartford cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Marshal Jenkins, I do not condone lying, and I am not happy that Mr. Graves was not honest with me about his past. But Miss Thornton is right. In the 4 months he has worked for me, he has been reliable, hardworking, and honest. He has done nothing to make me doubt his character. If he was still the man he used to be, he would have robbed me blind and disappeared. Instead, he has been building a life here. That has to count for something." The second marshal holstered his gun and looked at his partner. "What do you think, Jenkins? Maybe we could wire the judge and see if there is any possibility of a pardon or commutation, given the circumstances." Jenkins looked like he wanted to argue, but he was outnumbered and he knew it. Finally, he lowered his gun, though his expression remained hard. "Fine. We will take him into custody and hold him in Veta until we can get word from the territorial judge, but I am not promising anything. The law is the law, and he broke it." Xander nodded slowly. "I understand. And I am willing to face the consequences of my actions. But thank you for at least considering the possibility that people can change." They put Xander in handcuffs, and Evelyn had to watch as they led him away. Before they took him outside, he looked back at her, and she saw love and gratitude in his eyes, along with fear and resignation. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything. No matter what happens, I want you to know that meeting you changed my life. You made me believe I could be better, and that is a gift I will carry with me always." "This is not over," Evelyn said fiercely, though tears were streaming down her face. "I am not giving up on you, Xander Graves. Do you hear me? I am not giving up." The marshals took him away, and Evelyn stood in the doorway of the ranch house, watching them ride toward town with Xander between them, his hands bound. She felt Jacob Hartford's hand on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort and support. "He is a good man," Hartford said quietly. "I am angry that he lied, but I can see why he did it. And I can see that he loves you very much, Miss Thornton. We will do what we can to help him." "Thank you," Evelyn whispered. "He does not deserve to hang for trying to be better." She rode back to town slowly, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. She could not just sit by and wait for the territorial judge to decide Xander's fate. She had to do something, had to find a way to help him. When she reached Veta, she went straight to the marshal's office, where Xander was being held in one of the cells. Marshal Higgins, who had known Evelyn since she was a child, looked uncomfortable but resolute. "I am sorry, Miss Thornton, but I cannot let you see him. The federal marshals have custody of him, and they gave strict orders that he is not to have any visitors until the judge responds to their wire." "How long will that take?" "A week, maybe more. The passes are snowed in, so the wire has to go the long way around through Denver." "A week." Evelyn thought she might go mad with worry in a week. But she nodded and thanked Marshal Higgins, then went home to face her father's inevitable questions. Ernest Thornton was shocked and upset to learn that the young man courting his daughter was a wanted outlaw, but to Evelyn's relief, he was also sympathetic. "People make mistakes, especially when they are young," her father said, sitting beside her at the kitchen table and holding her hand. "If he has truly changed, and if Jacob Hartford will vouch for him, then he deserves a chance to prove himself. I will write a letter to the territorial judge as well, explaining that Xander has been a positive presence in our community." Over the next week, Evelyn collected letters from everyone in Veta who had interacted with Xander. Jacob Hartford wrote a glowing recommendation, detailing Xander's work ethic and character. The ranch hands who had worked alongside him all signed a statement saying he had been a good and trustworthy colleague. Even Reverend Thompson wrote a letter about redemption and second chances, though he had only met Xander briefly at church services. Evelyn took all these letters to Marshal Higgins, who promised to forward them to the territorial judge along with the marshal's report. She had done everything she could, and now all she could do was wait. The days crawled by with agonizing slowness. Evelyn could not eat or sleep properly. She spent her time working in the store and visiting the cemetery, where she knelt before Margaret Graves' headstone and begged the dead woman to watch over her son. She felt foolish talking to a gravestone, but it was the only thing that gave her any comfort. Finally, after 10 days that felt like 10 years, a wire arrived from the territorial judge. Marshal Higgins called a meeting at his office, and Evelyn was there when the marshals read the judge's decision aloud. Her heart was in her throat as Marshal Jenkins unfolded the paper and began to read in his flat, official voice. After careful consideration of the evidence and the testimony provided, Judge Morrison has decided that Xander Graves is to be released from custody on the following conditions. First, he must pay a fine of $500 to compensate for his past crimes. Second, he must remain in the Veta area for a period of 2 years, during which time he will be under the supervision of the local marshal. Third, he must continue to maintain honest employment and give no cause for complaint. If he meets these conditions, his record will be cleared and the bounty will be removed. If he fails to meet these conditions, he will be immediately arrested and tried for his previous crimes. Evelyn felt like she might faint from relief. Xander was not going to hang. He was not going to prison. He was being given the second chance he had worked so hard to earn. She heard herself laugh, a sound of pure joy, and then she was crying, and Marshal Higgins was patting her shoulder awkwardly while the federal marshals looked uncomfortable. $500 is a lot of money, Jenkins said, as if he hoped this might still derail the plan. How is he supposed to pay that? I will lend it to him, Evelyn said immediately. I have savings from my work at the store. He can pay me back over time. That is not necessary, Jacob Hartford said, stepping into the office behind her. I will pay the fine. Consider it an investment in a good employee. He can work it off over the next year or so. Jenkins looked disappointed, but he had no choice but to accept the judge's decision. They released Xander from his cell, and he emerged into the afternoon sunlight looking thin and exhausted but profoundly grateful. The first thing he did was turn to Evelyn and pull her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I thought I had lost you, he murmured into her hair. I thought they were going to take me away and I would never see you again. I told you I was not giving up on you, Evelyn said, her voice muffled against his chest. I meant it. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other while everyone politely looked away. Then Xander released her and turned to Jacob Hartford, extending his hand. Sir, I do not know how to thank you for everything, for believing in me, for standing up for me, for paying the fine. I will spend the rest of my life earning your trust. Hartford shook his hand firmly. You already have my trust, son. Now come on back to the ranch. You have missed 10 days of work, and there are fences that need mending. Xander laughed, a sound of pure relief and happiness, and Evelyn felt her heart soar. He was safe. He was free. He had been given the second chance he deserved, and she knew with absolute certainty that he would not waste it. The next 2 years passed in a blur of work and happiness. Xander threw himself into his job at the ranch, working harder than ever to prove that the judge's faith in him was justified. He saved every penny he could, living frugally in the bunkhouse and spending his free time with Evelyn. They courted properly now, with her father's blessing and the town's approval. Everyone in Veta knew Xander's story by then, and most people admired his determination to change his life. Evelyn continued to run the store, but she found herself increasingly thinking about the future, about marriage and children and building a life with Xander. He had told her he wanted to marry her once he had cleared his name and saved enough money, and she was content to wait. She knew good things were worth waiting for. In the spring of 1880, Xander received word that the territorial judge had officially cleared his record. He had met all the conditions of his release, and the bounty on his head was permanently removed. He was free, truly free for the first time in years. That Sunday after church, Xander asked Evelyn to take a walk with him up to the cemetery. It was a beautiful May morning, with wildflowers blooming across the hillsides and the mountains still snow-capped in the distance. They walked hand in hand up to the graveyard, and Xander led her to his mother's headstone, where he knelt and placed fresh flowers on the grave. "I wanted to tell her," he said softly, looking at the weathered stone. "I wanted her to know that I finally became the man she hoped I would be. That I found my way back from the darkness." Evelyn knelt beside him, placing her own flowers on the grave. "I think she knows. I think she has been watching over you this whole time, guiding you back to where you belong." Xander turned to look at her, and she saw such love and devotion in his eyes that it took her breath away. "Evelyn Thornton, you are the best thing that has ever happened to me. You believed in me when no one else did. You fought for me when I could not fight for myself. You showed me that I was capable of being more than my worst choices, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that your faith in me was justified." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring, holding it up so it caught the sunlight. "I do not have much to offer you. Just an honest name, a decent job, and a heart that belongs completely to you. But if that is enough, will you marry me?" Evelyn felt tears stream down her face as she nodded vigorously. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you. That is more than enough. That is everything." He slid the ring onto her finger, and then he kissed her, a long, sweet kiss that tasted like happiness and promise and hope. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless and smiling, Evelyn noticed something carved into the base of Margaret Graves' headstone, something she had not seen before. She leaned closer and read the words, "The righteous man walks in his integrity." "Did you carve that?" she asked Xander. "Last week," he admitted. "I wanted to leave her with something more than just flowers, something that would remind anyone who saw it that integrity matters, that doing the right thing matters even when it is hard." Evelyn squeezed his hand. "She would be so proud of you." "I am so proud of you." They walked back down to town hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. They were married in late June in a simple ceremony at the church, with the whole town in attendance. Jacob Hartford stood up as Xander's best man, and Evelyn's father walked her down the aisle with tears of joy in his eyes. It was everything Evelyn had ever dreamed a wedding could be, full of love and laughter and community. After the wedding, Xander and Evelyn moved into a small house on the edge of town, a place of their own where they could build their future. Jacob Hartford had offered Xander a position as his foreman, with better pay and more responsibility, and Xander had accepted gratefully. Evelyn continued to help her father with the store, but she was already thinking about the children she hoped to have, the family they would raise together. The first year of their marriage was filled with simple joys and small challenges. They learned to navigate living together, to compromise and communicate and support each other through the ups and downs of daily life. Xander proved to be a devoted husband, always putting Evelyn's needs before his own, and she loved him more deeply with each passing day. In the spring of 1881, Evelyn discovered she was pregnant. Xander was overjoyed at the news, though he was also terrified at the prospect of becoming a father. Evelyn assured him that he would be wonderful, that his own difficult childhood had taught him exactly how not to raise a child, and that their baby would be blessed to have him as a father. Their son was born in December of 1881, a healthy baby boy with Evelyn's dark hair and Xander's gray eyes. They named him William Ernest Graves after both of their fathers, but they called him Will. Xander wept when he held his son for the first time, overcome with emotion at the idea that he was responsible for this tiny, perfect life. "I promise you," he whispered to the sleeping infant, "I will be the father you deserve. I will teach you to be honest and kind and brave. I will show you that mistakes do not have to define you, that you can always choose to be better. And I will love you with everything I have, for as long as I live." Evelyn watched her husband with their newborn son, and she felt her heart overflow with love and gratitude. This was the man who had been an outlaw, who had lived on the run, who had made terrible choices in his youth. But he had changed. He had worked hard and earned redemption, and now he was a devoted husband and father, a respected member of the community, and a man of integrity. One evening, when Will was about 3 months old, Evelyn and Xander were sitting together on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains while their son slept in Evelyn's arms. Xander had his arm around her shoulders and they sat in comfortable silence, both content with the life they had built together. "You ever think about your past?" Evelyn asked softly. "About the man you used to be?" Xander was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Sometimes. But not with regret anymore. I used to be haunted by all the mistakes I made, all the people I hurt. But I have learned that the past is just that, the past. What matters is who I am now and who I am becoming. And I am becoming a better man every day, thanks to you." "I did not change you," Evelyn said, looking up at him. "You changed yourself, I just believed in you." "Your belief made all the difference," Xander said, kissing the top of her head. "Without that, I would still be running. But you showed me that I was worth saving, that I deserved a second chance, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that gift." Evelyn nestled closer to him, careful not to wake the baby. "Do you remember that day in the store when you came to buy supplies? When I could have turned you in, but I chose not to. I remember every detail of that day. I remember how frightened you looked and how brave. I remember thinking that you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen and that I did not deserve to be in the same room with you. And do you remember what I said to you right before you left?" Xander thought for a moment, then shook his head. "I am not sure. There was so much happening, so much I was feeling." Evelyn smiled and leaned up to whisper in his ear. "I did not say it out loud, but I thought it. I believe you are good. Even then, before I really knew you, I could see the goodness inside you, buried under all the pain and regret. I knew you were worth saving." Xander pulled back to look at her, his eyes shining with emotion. "And were you right? Am I good?" Evelyn cupped his face in her free hand, looking deep into his eyes. "I always knew you were good," she whispered. "From that very first moment, and everything you have done since then has proven me right." He kissed her then, a kiss full of love and promise and gratitude. And as the sun set over the mountains and their baby slept peacefully in her arms, Evelyn knew that this was exactly where she was meant to be, with this man who had traveled such a long, difficult road to find his way home. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Will grew into a bright, curious boy who loved helping his father with the horses and following his mother around the store. In 1883, they had a daughter, whom they named Margaret after Xander's mother. Maggie, as they called her, had her mother's green eyes and her father's adventurous spirit. Xander continued to work for Jacob Hartford, eventually becoming a partner in the ranch. His reputation as an honest, hard-working man was firmly established, and no one remembered anymore that he had once been an outlaw. He was simply Xander Graves, good husband, devoted father, and pillar of the community. Evelyn took over the general store when her father decided to retire, and she ran it with the same skill and dedication she had shown since she was a teenager. The store prospered under her management, and it became a gathering place for the community, where people came not just to buy supplies, but to socialize and share news. On Sundays, the Graves family always visited the cemetery, bringing flowers for Margaret Graves and spending time at her graveside. Xander taught his children about their grandmother, about how she had been kind and strong, and had loved her family with all her heart. And Evelyn would watch her husband with their children, sharing these stories of the past, and she would feel grateful all over again for the day she had chosen to help a desperate outlaw instead of turning him in. Sometimes, late at night when the children were asleep, Xander and Evelyn would sit together and talk about the journey that had brought them to this place. They marveled at how a single choice, a single moment of compassion and faith, had changed both of their lives so completely. If Evelyn had grabbed that shotgun that day in the store, if she had screamed for help or refused to give him supplies, everything would have been different. Xander would probably be dead or in prison, and Evelyn would have married someone safe and respectable and spent her life wondering what might have been. But instead, she had chosen to believe in redemption. She had chosen to see the man beneath the outlaw, the good heart beneath the bad choices. And that choice had given them both everything they had ever wanted: love, family, purpose, and peace. In the summer of 1888, Xander and Evelyn celebrated their 8th wedding anniversary with a trip to Denver, leaving the children with Evelyn's father for a few days. It was the first time they had been alone together since Will was born, and they spent the time exploring the city, eating in nice restaurants and simply enjoying each other's company. On their last night in Denver, they went to see a play at the Opera House. It was a melodramatic story about a reformed criminal who won the love of a good woman and became a respected citizen. Evelyn and Xander looked at each other and laughed at the parallels to their own story, though Xander whispered that their story had been much more difficult and much more beautiful than anything a playwright could imagine. After the play, they walked back to their hotel through the gas-lit streets, hand in hand like they had been on that first walk after church so many years ago. The city was alive with sound and movement, so different from their quiet life in Veta, but Evelyn found herself eager to get home to their children and their simple, happy life. "You ever miss the excitement?" she asked Xander as they walked. "The adventure and danger of your old life?" Xander stopped and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Not for a single second. That life was not exciting, it was exhausting. It was lonely and frightening and empty. This life, the one I have with you, is the only adventure I will ever need. Coming home to you and the children every night, working hard at something that matters, being part of a community that respects me. This is everything I ever wanted and more than I ever thought I could have. "I love you," Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. "I loved you when you were an outlaw trying to change. I loved you when you were a ranch hand earning his second chance. And I love you now, as my husband and the father of my children and the best man I have ever known." "I love you too," Xander said, "more than I have words to express. You saved my life, Evelyn, not just by helping me that day in the store, but by showing me what love could be, by giving me a reason to be better, by believing in me even when I did not believe in myself." They stood there on the Denver street, holding each other close, and Evelyn thought about all the unlikely twists and turns that had brought them to this moment. If someone had told her 8 years ago that she would fall in love with an outlaw, that she would fight for his redemption and marry him and build a beautiful life with him, she would have thought they were insane. But life, she had learned, was full of surprises. And sometimes the most unlikely people turned out to be exactly who you needed. When they returned to Veta, they were greeted by their children running out to meet them, full of stories about their time with Grandpa Ernest. Xander scooped them both up in his arms, laughing as they chattered excitedly about all the things they had done. Evelyn watched them with a full heart, thinking about how blessed they all were. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Xander and Evelyn sat together in their small living room, reviewing the books from the store and the ranch, planning for the future. They talked about expanding the store, about buying their own piece of land someday, about the education they wanted to provide for their children. They were building something lasting, something that would outlive them and benefit future generations. "I want to tell the children the truth someday," Xander said suddenly. "About my past, about what I did and how I changed. I do not want them to find out from someone else, and I do not want them to think their father was always the man he is now. I want them to understand that people can change, that mistakes do not have to define you." Evelyn considered this carefully. "When do you think we should tell them?" "When they are old enough to understand. Maybe when they are teenagers, old enough to grasp the complexity of it all. I want them to know the full story, including the part about how their mother saved their father's life by believing in him when no one else did." "They will be proud of you," Evelyn said with certainty. "They will see what I saw, that you are a man of courage and integrity who was strong enough to change his life." Over the next few years, the Graves family continued to grow and thrive. In 1890, they had another son, whom they named Ernest after Evelyn's father. Little Ernest, or Ernie as they called him, was a quiet, thoughtful child who loved books and learning. The family was complete now, 3 children who filled their home with laughter and noise and joy. Xander and Evelyn purchased a small ranch of their own, with help from Jacob Hartford and a loan from the bank. It was only 100 acres, modest compared to the Hartford spread, but it was theirs. They raised cattle and horses, and Xander taught his children everything he knew about ranching and hard work and doing things the right way. Evelyn's father passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1892, and though they mourned his loss, they were grateful he had lived to see his daughter happily married and his grandchildren thriving. The store passed fully to Evelyn, and she ran it with the help of a young woman from town, dividing her time between the business and the ranch. In the summer of 1893, when Will was 11 years old and starting to ask more questions about his father's past, Xander and Evelyn decided it was time to tell their children the truth. They gathered all 3 of them together one evening after supper and sat them down in the living room. The children could tell something important was happening, and they listened with wide eyes as their father began to speak. "I need to tell you something about my past," Xander said, his voice steady but serious. "Something I am not proud of, but something you need to know. Before I met your mother, before I came to Veta, I made some very bad choices. I was an outlaw. I robbed banks and stages, and I ran from the law for several years." The children stared at him in shock. Will spoke first, his voice uncertain. "You were a criminal, Papa?" "Yes, I was. I did things I am not proud of, things that hurt other people, and I had to face the consequences of those actions. But the important part is what happened next. I decided I did not want to live that way anymore. I decided to change to become a better man, and your mother helped me do that." He reached over and took Evelyn's hand, and she continued the story. "When your father came to Veta, he was trying to visit his mother's grave. That is your grandmother, Margaret, who is buried in the cemetery where we go every Sunday. I met him in the store, and I could have turned him into the law. There was a bounty on his head, and people would have called me a hero for capturing an outlaw. But I looked at him, and I saw something good inside him, something worth saving, so I helped him instead. I gave him supplies and kept his secret, and then I helped him get an honest job working for Mr. Hartford." Maggie, who was 8 years old and deeply romantic, clasped her hands together. "Mama, that is so brave. You could have gotten in trouble." "I could have," Evelyn agreed. "And I was scared. But I believed your father deserved a second chance, and he proved me right. He worked hard, he lived honestly, and when the law finally caught up with him, the judge saw how much he had changed and gave him a pardon. But none of that would have happened if he had not made the choice to change. That choice came from inside him, from his own heart and his own conscience." Xander looked at each of his children seriously. "I am telling you this because I want you to understand that everyone makes mistakes. Some people make small mistakes, and some people make big ones like I did. But what matters is what you do afterward. Do you let your mistakes define you, or do you work to become better? I chose to become better, and it was the hardest thing I have ever done. But it was worth it, because it gave me this life with your mother and with all of you." Will thought about this for a long moment, then asked, "Did you ever hurt anyone, Papa? When you were an outlaw?" "I shot at people, yes, when they were chasing me. But I never killed anyone, and I tried very hard not to hurt innocent people. That does not make what I did right, but it is the truth. I drew a line that I would not cross, even when it would have been easier to cross it." Ernest, who was only 3 years old, did not really understand what was being discussed, but he crawled into his father's lap and hugged him tightly. "I love you, Papa," he said simply. Xander's eyes filled with tears as he hugged his youngest son. "I love you too, Ernie. More than you will ever know." Maggie came over and hugged him from the other side, and Will, after a moment's hesitation, joined the embrace. Evelyn watched her family holding each other, all of them accepting and loving and united, and she felt her heart overflow with gratitude. This was what redemption looked like. Not just one man changing his life, but the ripple effect of that change touching everyone around him. Over the next few years, the children processed their father's past in different ways. Will became fiercely protective of Xander, ready to defend him against anyone who might judge him for his history. Maggie romanticized the story, telling her friends about how her brave mother had saved her father from a life of crime. And Ernest, as he grew older, simply accepted it as part of who his father was, no more or less important than any other aspect of his identity. The town of Veta had grown over the years, with new businesses and new families arriving all the time. But the old-timers still remembered the story of Xander Graves, the outlaw who had turned his life around and become one of the most respected men in the community. Young people were told his story as an example of how it was never too late to change, how redemption was always possible for those willing to work for it. In 1898, when Xander was 43 years old and Evelyn was 42, they celebrated their 18th wedding anniversary. Their children were growing up fast. Will was 16 and already talking about taking over the ranch someday. Maggie was 13 and showing a talent for business that reminded everyone of her mother. And Ernest was 8, a bookish child who loved school and dreamed of becoming a teacher someday. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Xander and Evelyn walked up to the cemetery together, as they often did on special occasions. They stood before Margaret Graves' headstone, now weathered by 20 years of Xander's regular visits, and he placed fresh wildflowers on the grave. "I wish you could have met Evelyn, Mama," Xander said softly, speaking to the stone as if his mother could hear. "She is everything you would have wanted for me, strong and kind and wise. She saw the good in me when I could not see it myself. She saved my life, not just once but every day since I have known her." Evelyn stood beside him, her hand in his, and added her own words. "I wish I could have known you too, but I feel like I do know you through your son. He has your love and your strength. And he has honored your memory by becoming the man you hoped he would be." They stood there in the twilight, remembering the journey that had brought them to this moment. All the fear and uncertainty and risk had been worth it for this life they had built together. All the hard work and struggle had led to this peace and happiness and love. As they walked back down toward town, Xander stopped suddenly and turned to face Evelyn. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, and in that beautiful light, he looked young again, like the scared outlaw who had walked into her store 20 years ago asking for supplies and a second chance. "Do you remember what I promised you that first Sunday when I asked to walk you home from church?" he asked. Evelyn smiled. "You promised that you would prove I was right to believe in you. And have I proved it?" She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his weathered skin. "Every single day for 20 years, you have proved it. Every time you work hard for our family. Every time you show kindness to a stranger. Every time you teach our children about honor and integrity. You are proof that people can change, that redemption is real, that love can transform even the most broken life into something beautiful." Xander pulled her close, holding her like he never wanted to let go. "I would not be here without you. I would not be this man without your faith in me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Evelyn Graves, and I will spend whatever time we have left making sure you never regret taking a chance on a desperate outlaw." "I could never regret it," Evelyn said, her voice full of love and certainty. "You were always good, Xander. From that very first moment I saw it. And every day since then you have shown the world what I already knew. That beneath all the mistakes and the pain and the fear, you were always a good man. You just needed someone to believe it, and I always believed it. I always knew you were good." They kissed then, a long, tender kiss that held 20 years of love and partnership and shared struggle. And when they finally walked back down into town, hand in hand like they had been on that first Sunday so long ago, they both knew that their story was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more joys to celebrate and sorrows to endure. But they would face it all together, bound by a love that had been forged in the crucible of redemption and tempered by years of devotion. The years rolled on, bringing the turn of the century and all the changes that came with it. The Wild West was fading into memory, replaced by railroads and telegraphs and automobiles. But in Veta, the story of Xander and Evelyn Graves remained fresh, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder that it was never too late to change, never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Their children grew up and started families of their own. Will married a rancher's daughter and took over the family ranch, expanding it into one of the most successful operations in the area. Maggie married a merchant from Denver and opened her own store, becoming a successful businesswoman in her own right. And Ernest became a teacher, just as he had dreamed, educating children in a one-room schoolhouse and instilling in them the same values his parents had taught him. As Xander and Evelyn grew older, they spent more and more time together, content in their small house on the edge of town, watching their grandchildren play and remembering the wild journey that had brought them to this peaceful place. They never took a single day for granted, always grateful for the second chance they had been given, the love they had found, and the family they had built together. And every Sunday, without fail, they walked up to the cemetery and placed fresh flowers on Margaret Graves' headstone. It had become their tradition, their way of honoring the woman who had given Xander life and the place where their own story had truly begun. They would stand there together, hand in hand, and remember everything that had led them to this moment. The fear and the hope, the risk and the reward, the mistakes and the redemption. On a warm spring day in 1915, when Xander was 60 and Evelyn was 59, they made their weekly pilgrimage to the cemetery together. Xander moved more slowly now, his once strong body worn down by decades of hard work, but his spirit was as vigorous as ever. They placed their flowers on Margaret's grave, and then they sat on the bench that their children had installed there years ago, looking out over the town they had called home for nearly 40 years. "We did all right, did we not?" Xander said, his arm around Evelyn's shoulders. "We built a good life. We built a beautiful life," Evelyn corrected him. "We raised 3 wonderful children who have become good people. We created a home full of love and laughter. We showed everyone that redemption is possible, that change is real, that love can heal anything." "I could not have done any of it without you," Xander said, kissing her temple. "You were my salvation, Evelyn. You still are." Evelyn leaned her head on his shoulder, content and peaceful. "And you were my adventure, my once-in-a-lifetime love." The proof that sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the right choice. They sat there for a long time, watching the sun move across the sky, remembering everything they had been through together. And when they finally rose to walk back down into town, they did so hand in hand, just as they always had, just as they always would. 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen love over fear, redemption over judgment, hope over despair. The outlaw had turned cowboy to earn her trust, working harder than he had ever worked at anything to prove he could be the man she believed he was. And through all the years that followed, through all the challenges and joys and ordinary moments that made up a life, she had never regretted the choice she made that day in the general store, when she gave supplies to a desperate stranger instead of turning him in for the reward. Because she had always known from that very first moment when their eyes met across the counter, that beneath the dust and the danger and the wanted posters was a good man waiting to be discovered. And she had spent the rest of her life being grateful that she had trusted her instincts, followed her heart, and given that good man the chance he deserved. "I always knew you were good," she had told him on their anniversary. And it was the truest thing she had ever said.